It's 9:07. Good morning. This morning, yes, the board meeting is in session. I'm calling it to order. And around the table this morning is House Majority Leader John Diehl. John, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, McGraw.
Editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Tony Messenger. Good to have you back.
Good morning.
And filling in for Tony last week, now filling in for Jane Duker this week, is local attorney slash film director slash one heck of a good guy, Jay Kanzler. Jay, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, let's get right to it. So we'll start with you, Tony Messenger. Your newspaper has been breaking stories all week long and last week as well over this crime lab story in which the $3.7 million HVAC contract was awarded to the head of the police board's company that he started as a subcontracting company and led to all sorts of things, including the county looking at this and saying there's no conflict of interest.
That's the most amazing thing about this. And if you look at the history of conflict, the recent history of conflicts of interest in the Dooley administration, there are many of them. And almost every time the county attorney says, there's nothing to see here. There's no big deal. Trust us. This one is so obvious. You don't have to be somebody who follows politics regularly, who's an attorney, who the head of the police board created a company after he became the head of the police board and then got a subcontract, which is one of the biggest parts of the contract, to help build the crime lab. It is most definitely a conflict of interest. The county council and now perhaps the FBI are also looking into it as to whether or not it's criminal. The astounding thing is this. Nobody's yet been fired. Nobody's yet resigned from the police board. The county has not yet come out and said, you know what, we were wrong. That's a big conflict of interest, and our county attorney needs to be looking for a new job because it's just so obvious and it's arrogant and it's unbelievable that our county administrators continue to believe that they just have this big piggy bank of taxpayer dollars and they can spend it however they want to enrich their friends, and it's utterly ridiculous.
Hold on a second, let me just jump in here. Not only has you said that, not only has other people said that, but the partner of Gregory Sansone has said, hey, we probably shouldn't have gotten that.
That was the greatest quote in this whole story, several days of stories by a bunch of reporters for the Post-Dispatch. And there's this great quote on the top of the front page yesterday or the day before, and he says, he's the guy who who Sansone came to him because he's a contractor, and Sansone came to him with a bunch of money and said, hey, we're going to get rich. Let's form this company. And the guy who gets the contract says, yeah, we probably shouldn't have got that contract.
Well, not only are we going to get rich, but we're going to get rich off county contracts.
Yeah.
That was the pitch to him.
It's horrible corruption, and I really believe at some point heads are going to have to roll.
Anybody else want to chime in?
It's a very egregious situation. It's clearly a conflict of interest. You keep seeing John Temporiti popping up and all these things. Things seems to be a common thread.
In no official capacity,
as a campaign manager,
he's calling police board members, asking them all sorts of things, which
right.
seems inappropriate. If what is reported is true, it seems clearly.
But it's not. But it's not from Charlie. It's just a suggestion or a discussion among friends.
Well, but here's what's great about the Temporiti thing, and for the listeners who don't know, John Temporiti is the campaign manager for Charlie Dooley. His son works for Charlie Dooley in another nepotism type position. Temporiti used to be on the county payroll, so Temporiti's not on the county payroll. He has no county official business. One of the police board members tells the Post-Dispatch on the record that Temporiti called and asked him to resign. Here's what's great about the Temporiti quote. Temporiti, in denying that he did anything inappropriate, admits to doing something inappropriate. He says, I wasn't calling to ask about resign on the police board. I was asking about the racial profiling. That's another police matter. That's another official matter that the campaign manager for Charlie Dooley should have nothing to do with whatsoever. It's just horrible.
I think to your point, Tony, and I said this last week, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts over there. We continue to have these acts of corruption, these conflicts of interest, and yet it seems not to faze anyone. They deny that there is that conflict. John Temporiti starts calling around saying, well, I'll just fix this. We'll stack the police board. It's as though they don't learn over there. They're clueless as to kind of, I think, the perception now and the rightful perception that it's gone way too far.
Here's what I don't understand. First of all, I don't understand. I don't hear the outrage on the street from John Q. Public. And two, the other thing I don't understand is how can they get another contractor up and running? Because the work on the crime lab has stopped. Now they have to go out and find another contractor. Who's watching that bid process? And who actually gave the bid to this company in the first place?
Well, I'll weigh in on that. I think the lack of outreach, I think people expect it, which is really, really sad and disappointing. And I think they think nothing's going to change because of the political makeup of the county. Now, I hear in my circles a lot of outrage over this, but I think some of it is a lack of what can be done about it. But there's also a bigger picture here on just the utter waste of government and taxpayer dollars. Well, why are we building a separate crime lab in the county when there's another brand new crime lab in the city?
And the city
just a few miles away.
No,
they're willing to share it. So why are we wasting money building duplicate labs a couple miles apart when a couple years ago we couldn't fund parks? You know, there's problems with giving police officers raises and all these other problems the county has policing some unincorporated areas of the county and providing services there. Why are we doing this boondoggle anyway when there's a perfectly acceptable crime lab that both the city and the county can share? It's not like a criminal commits a crime in St. Louis City and then says, well, wait a minute, I'm not crossing Highway 40 here at McCausland going to the county or vice versa. We're a region. It should be a regional crime lab, and we shouldn't be wasting the money to begin with.
How about the fact that the police chief calls the FBI and says, we've got a problem here?
An appropriate thing for him to do. And then what does Charlie Dooley say? Charlie Dooley reacts to that by saying, boy, I wish he would have given me a heads up. Can you imagine you're a cop. You're investigating a crime.
Your boss.
The crime is allegedly committed by people who work for Charlie Dooley, and Charlie Dooley wants the cop to give him a heads up.
Well,
come on.
But Charlie Dooley says, yeah, you should have let us know. Well, the county looked at it and said there is no conflict of interest. Yeah. So you knew about it. You looked at it. You didn't think it's a conflict of interest. I'm going to go to the feds now. And we should end on this note. And I haven't heard anybody else say this, but the county counselor wrote a letter to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in which you guys published saying, why is this such a big story now?
Didn't even think it was news. Yeah. Didn't even think it was news. I really believe this is the reality.
I didn't see it.
This is the reality for Charlie Dooley right now. He's the elected official. He's in charge of the county, and we have written on the editorial page before. We don't know, as it relates to this other problem that they have, where all of a sudden the county building that we're paying for is $30 million more than they said it was going to be when we voted for it. At some point, Charlie Dooley has to decide, I'm the county executive, and all of these people that work for me are really not doing their jobs. I need to clean house. And if he doesn't, then eventually the voters are going to.
The problem with that, Tony, is I think he has surrounded himself with people that are, of the same mindset. Going to the chief of police and saying, gee, I wish we could have kept this kind of in-house.
Within our little circle.
We could have fixed it ourselves.
Yeah, don't be telling anybody all this stuff.
That's the problem. He's surrounded himself. At the very heart is Charlie Dooley and the people that he surrounded himself with who think they are better than us, better than county government, better than the taxpayers. They know what's best.
But the money is there for their own private kiddies.
That's House Majority Leader John Diehl, Tony Messenger, the editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and Jay Kanzler filling in for Jane Duker. Serenity now. When we come back, what does the House Majority Leader think of the rodeo clown controversy at the State Fair? We'll talk with him next about that on the board meeting as it continues on the Big 550 KTRS, and you can watch us at STLTODAY.com.
The board meeting continues on KTRS.
9:22, we are back. Editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Tony Messenger. We've got local attorney, film director, and all-around great guy, Jay Kanzler, and House Majority Leader John Diehl, all in the board meeting this morning on the Big 550 KTRS and STLToday.com. John Diehl, What are your thoughts as you watch the state fair become the laughingstock with the rodeo clowns wearing the President Obama mask?
Well, I think of the power of the internet and social media. One, I'll just preface all this by saying I don't think anybody should be implying to do bodily harm to the President of the United States. That's probably in poor taste, irrespective of who does it or what the circumstances are. But, the double standards that you see here in terms of some of the outrage on this situation, when clearly this stuff has happened to other presidents before. You've had Pearl Jam at a concert sticking George Bush's head up on a stake. You've had George Bush burned in effigy. You had a movie that was made while George Bush was president, assassinating the president. And hey, a movie's made, but it won film awards. And where's the outrage on trying to shut down that organization? Our state fair, and I was out there yesterday, is a big undertaking that showcases agriculture to the state. And if no one's been there before, I would encourage people to go out and do it. It's a great event that you have a lot of kids and high school students that participate in this through the 4-H, doing shows and livestock awards, and it's really a fun event with rides and a lot of heritage. So it's unfortunate that somehow this got national legs and is trying to portray one of the larger, more successful state fairs in the country in this light. But, the double standards on this, I think, are a little bit.
What about the fact that this is a taxpayer-funded event? Do you think politics?
Well, it's really not largely a taxpayer-funded event.
But
it's
it is
largely,
somewhat.
It is somewhat through wine and grape production, not through general revenue.
But it is it
Tony,
is
no
a
more than a
state,
stadium.
But it is, and you just talked about what a great event it is because it
Right.
showcases the state because of the 4-H, because of the agriculture heritage. It is a state event that makes it different than a Pearl Jam concert or whatever other comparison.
In a publicly funded stadium?
It's a different sort of event. It's not an event where that sort of, well, first of all, like you said, and like Peter Kinder, our Republican lieutenant governor, said immediately, and like Senator Claire McCaskill said, what happened was wrong. It was tasteless. It shouldn't have happened. But to imply that there's a double standard, first of all, ignores the racial element, and every black person I have talked to about this event is very offended by that racial element in this. So that I disagree with you when you say that there's a double standard, because you had bipartisan outrage immediately, and I do think there is a difference between the Missouri State Fair and some of the other events. It's not just the public money; it's the kind of event and what it means for the state. It was offensive. They reacted quickly. I think they reacted appropriately. I'm glad that the state officials, both Republican and Democrat, condemned it. But there was a racial element,
But
and
you don't
I
think-
don't think we can deny that.
You don't think in the media and the social media that there's
Oh,
been
the
a
media and
double
social-
standard in this?
I
Oh, come on,
I
Tony.
did not believe there was a double standard
Oh,
in this.
Tony,
No,
Tony,
I
come
believe that people who wanted the story to go away invented the double standard angle and then went back on Google and tried to find a bunch of times where George Bush was made fun of. Yes, George Bush was made fun of, and he shouldn't have been made fun of. I don't like it when presidents get made fun of. I don't, not made fun of, not like late night comedian stuff, but we've reached a point in our political discourse where anything goes. And I really think as a nation, we need to step back from that and say, you know what? The presidency means something. And we need to recognize that. And we also have to recognize that this is our first black president. And we do have black people who in this country who are just the first generation to be able to legally vote. And we can't just keep going back on history and forgetting that. I know a lot of black people who are offended by it. And so that affects the way I look at it.
I think, Tony, two things. One, I agree with you, John, in the double standard. Not that it was not tasteless and offensive. The mask in the people that I've spoken to tends to be this issue of this caricature, these stereotypes of features, and that the mask was offensive. That we can't forget history. But to take it further, is a Treasurer Jones saying, well, I don't think we should have a bull chasing around the president of the United States who just happens to be black. It's a double standard to say that we can't attack in the sense of with satire and sarcasm, even some tasteless humor, the president of the United States because he happens to be black. I happen to be a fan of the late night cartoons, and I will tell you that, and there have been programs after programs after programs that have portrayed President Bush as lots of things. And you know what? Fair game. I agree with you. We should have a little more respect for the presidency, but we can't now all of a sudden start it when it's we've
say
done
we
it.
can't make fun of this guy.
But what about this? I mean, each one skewers their own. Natalie Maines goes out and says bad things about President Bush, and her music is banned from country music stations because she had the audacity to question Bush's war policy.
Is she Dixie Chicks? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was the Dixie Chicks. It's clearly what happened was wrong. We all agree with that. It was inappropriate on 100 different levels, and I think we can all agree that it was somewhat racial. Whether it was meant to be or not, it was. And that's what sort of upset a lot of people. It was a state-funded event where you're going to see a rodeo, and all of a sudden, you're smacked in the face with some type of Klan rally that sort of people started cheering about. Now,
come on, a Klan rally? Come on,
No. You might not think it was a Klan rally, but there are black Missourians who said that looks like a Klan rally,
and they were there.
No.
No, it's because of the portrayal of it. Look at the tape, okay? I mean, look at the tape in a lot of detail. It is not as pretend. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it wasn't an inappropriate thing to do, but this thing got up. It was pushed by a progressive blog, and their narrative is the one that the national media jumped on because they would like nothing more than to make rural Missouri into some type of laughing stock.
No, but I think the national media jumped on it because a Republican lieutenant governor and a Democratic U.S. senator made it news. And so that's the thing that I think we have to remember. It is now becoming a Republican-Democrat thing. It was not, as it started, a Republican-Democrat thing. And as I pointed out in the piece that I wrote on it, Sedalia is traditionally, not anymore, it's represented by Vicky Hartzler, but longtime home of former Congressman Ike Skelton, former Senate Leader James Mathewson. I mean, it's a traditional Democratic stronghold in the history of the state. So this is not a Democrat-Republican thing. It has become that on social media now. But I don't think it was that to begin with whatsoever.
And I think that was the point, that it was inappropriate, it was offensive, the mask, just some various elements, but that's where it should have ended. I mean, and I think the Lieutenant Governor Kinder and others to come out and say, you know what, that was wrong. It has now been picked up and made some kind of political football that they're going to throw around to people's advantage.
And that this is standard fare. It's what everybody thinks.
But Go ahead, John.
Well, and also to pushing back, this is taxpayer funded. The budget of the state fair is about $4.5 million. About $500,000 of that comes from publicly funded sources. It's largely a private event, which is funded through people paying for tickets for events and shows and entry fees and all those other types of things out there. There are taxpayer money that's used for the facilities out there, much like there are taxpayer money that's used for stadiums and other venues across the state that some of these other offensive acts also come and use that people pay tickets to go to. So there's a double.
This is going to get into the weeds just a little bit, but I'm going to disagree with you that it's a largely private event. In this state's history and most states' history, and I've researched this extensively, county fairs and state fairs were started by agricultural societies that in most states were actually built into statute. They are arms of the state government to a certain degree. They were created by either statute. In some cases, the ag societies were in the Constitution. They aren't entirely private. They are mostly a public event in some capacity, whether or not the money is primarily
well, but that's what we're saying. It's a taxpayer-funded event. It's not a taxpayer.
It's a public.
It's the Missouri State Fair.
Statement of Missouri pride for agriculture. That's what it is.
And it's open to all. It isn't. Yeah. This isn't a private event.
If you buy a ticket.
Right. Lastly, I want to say this. is that I think, and every time one of these things comes up where somebody says something stupid, somebody says something inappropriate, Mel Carnahan wears blackface, we shouldn't banish these people to some desert island never to be heard from again. People make mistakes. People say stupid things. We've got to learn to say, oh, my goodness, I didn't realize what I was doing was as offensive as you did. I'm sorry. Please explain to me why it's wrong, and can we move on from this?
Therein is my point precisely on this. Okay, the gentleman who did this should have been afforded the opportunity to apologize. Okay,
and the apology should be accepted.
I agree.
Right.
And then move on. Just like with all these other events that have happened with past presidents and everything else, this isn't the first president to be featured in a rodeo skit across the country.
Well, but again, Natalie Maines, when she apologizes, or whoever does, each side is equally wrong in not accepting the apology when the other side gets offended.
Well, but I can't. How are you going to make people buy her records?
No. I understand that. But my point is that everyone gets offended when their guy is being offended.
Understood.
Right. And when they apologize, say, I'm sorry, Mr. Jewish person, Mr. Muslim, Mrs. Woman, Miss whatever. I'm sorry. I didn't realize what I said was offensive. And people say, no, you should be banned for life. You should never run for office. We're all human. We all make mistakes. Some sensitivities are more than others. We should accept it, understand why some people in the community might think, boy, that kind of looked like a Klan rally. We might not think of it. Somebody might think, hey, that's a funny parody. But there are other people in the community just as valuable as we are who think, wait a minute, that didn't seem right to my kids. So that's my point. All right, it's my show. I get the last comment on that topic.
Okay.
That is House Majority Leader John Diehl, editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Tony Messenger, Jay Kanzler. Jay Kanzler will come back. He has an issue with the homeless numbers in the city of St. Louis. That's next on KTR.
It's the board meeting on McGraw Live in the Morning.
All right, we are back. It's the board meeting. We are in session. House Majority Leader John Diehl. I keep doing that. Missouri Governor John Diehl here on the show.
No, thank you.
Editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Tony Messenger, and local attorney and film director Jay Kanzler filling in for Jane Duker. Jay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The Post-Dispatch, Tony's paper this week, reported that St. Louis received a $1 million grant from the federal government to help chronic homelessness, which is a good thing, and they reported that this comes on top of a $1.25 million grant, mental health grant, and thereby putting the city on the verge of eliminating chronic homelessness. All of that is good, except that in the third paragraph of the article, it says officials estimate there are about 178 chronic homeless people in the city. If that's the case, which I absolutely disagree, I've been preparing for a documentary film on homeless veterans, and I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks in the city, and I'll tell you, there seem to be a whole lot more than 178 homeless people out there. But if it is 178 chronic homeless people and we received $2.25 million, we have received $13,000 to spend per homeless person. We could rent them all apartments and eliminate chronic homelessness. I think the city underestimates the problem they have down there, and if this is how we are addressing it, $2.25 million for 178 people, it is a terrible waste of taxpayer money.
Anybody want to chime in?
I don't know that it's necessarily a waste, because dealing with homelessness is a very expensive problem, and part of the problem that you have, and I agree with you, I think it's probably undercounted. I think, and that's not just a St. Louis problem, in part because some of the chronic homeless, you can't get into an apartment. And in fact, that's one of the things that the city and other cities do with the homeless is they try to get them into transitional housing. I don't know what it costs per unit or whatever, but that actually is one of the key strategies, is to try to take the homeless and use some money to get them into some form of rental and start to transition them into more reasonable, stable living. But there are some homeless that just simply, because of either mental issues or alcohol or drug issues or both, are going to be homeless, and there's nothing we can do. That's the constant struggle with the Larry Rice facility. Every city that Larry Rice is in, and I've lived in 3 different cities where Larry Rice has facilities, it's always this conflict between Larry doesn't run his places very well, but Larry's doing work that nobody wants to do and dealing with a homeless population that is going to stay homeless in some cases no matter what you do. I don't think it's a huge amount of money compared to the importance morally of ultimately doing something as a city to help the homeless. I don't know that it's being well spent. I haven't looked into it, but 2.5, 3 million, whatever it is, for dealing with the homeless, I don't think it's a huge amount of money.
And that wasn't my point, Tony, and I agree with you. My point in raising this is, if we're going to deal with this issue, let's address it head on, and let's not make it seem like we don't have a bigger problem than we do. While I was down in the city, I watched the city, come in with 2 pickup trucks or 2 dump trucks and take out a guy who'd been living under a bush for a year, take out all his stuff, throw it in a truck, and haul him off to jail. That's why that's what they have to do. There are not 178 chronic homeless people in the city of St. Louis. There are a lot more, and we need to address that, acknowledge it, and do something about it rather than throw their stuff in a dump truck and move them off somewhere else.
Well, it just shifts the problem. I mean, clearly homelessness is a symptom and not a cause of someone's problem. I think for the most part, most people who are chronic homeless have something else going on, whether it's veterans that have post-traumatic stress disorder, got back, didn't have the support networks that they need. Now, I think we need to be spending our money to focus on the root causes of what is causing someone to be homeless. There's some wonderful facilities in the city. I've had a chance to tour the Salvation Army's facility down in the Central West End, where they take people who are formerly homeless that may have substance abuse problems or mental issues and try to get them back into transitional housing with teaching job skills and making sure they get the treatment they need. So, I mean, I think that's where the money needs to be focused, is on programs like that and trying to get the homeless the treatment that they need to come back and try to be functional members of society.
As a resident of Washington Avenue for exactly 1 year, I have a number of thoughts on homelessness, and I agree with all of you to some extent, but you're never going to solve the homeless problem, and you're never going to get these people the help they need and they deserve if you keep giving them money when they ask for it. Because of whatever guilt you feel, because you see someone who stinks, who hasn't washed their hair, and you got more money than you'll ever need, and you give them $5 or $10, they're not going to go save up the money to put a down payment on a first month's, last month's rent. They're going to take that money and go buy alcohol and go buy drugs and continue the downward spiral. By giving homeless people money, whether it's on the side of an exit ramp, downtown St. Louis, if you go and their most altruistic philosophy is to let's go feed the homeless, you're doing absolutely no good for these people, and any homeless advocate will tell you the exact same thing. So we're going to have a homeless problem, and why are the homeless people in downtown St. Louis? Because people who go down to Washington Avenue, who go to the Cardinal game, who go to City Museum, they pay them nickels, dimes, quarters, $20 bills, and they feel, oh, I helped somebody today, and all you did was help continue the problem.
Yeah, the money needs to be given to the homeless advocate organizations,
right,
who have the skills to try to get those people off
churches
the streets.
Who come down and let's feed the home. You're doing no good. It's like it's like giving cat food on the back of your stoop. The cats keep coming to your stoop. You're not solving the problem of the homeless cats. You are creating a bigger problem. Anything else? Two.
I agree.
All right.
The final word.
2 times. We have just enough time. We have 4 minutes left. I want to ask some very smart people a question here. Speaker of the House Tim Jones, who refuses to come on this show, he only comes on the show when I'm not hosting, asked Attorney General Chris Koster what was passed in this bill. Is it so bad down there that they can't even agree on what's in the bill they passed for this tax cut?
Well, I think that's a pretty gross mischaracterization.
Well, that's why I'm asking. Asking.
Part of the job of the Attorney General is to provide interpretations of law. So one of the cases that Nixon is trying to make, okay, about the tax cut that we're going to have to consider at the veto session in September is whether or not that there would be a retroactive tax cut which would have an impact on the bottom line of the state. We don't believe that to be the case. Jay Nixon is saying that he believes that to be the case. Ultimately, if there's a court proceeding on this, it's going to be up to the Attorney General to come in and defend the state and to take a stand on it. So I think part of what the Speaker is trying to do, and I think he was correct in doing it, is to ask the Attorney General, what is your interpretation of this? Is this something that needs to be fixed in a future session, or is this something that you would agree with the General Assembly that it is drafted properly and the governor is using scare tactics on an incorrect interpretation to try to keep people from overriding his veto? I think it's an appropriate question. Attorney Generals, and there's a whole statutory process for asking Attorney Generals.
Do you have to be an Attorney General to determine that, or can a layperson read this language?
It's the attorney. No, I mean it's a legal interpretation, and part of there's actually a process in this state on asking the Attorney General opinions and interpretations of how statutes are going to be construed and what his position is for future. They're letter opinions. It happens all the time.
All right, I got 1 minute. Anybody want to respond?
It happens all the time, but not necessarily while legislation is still being considered. This is an attempt to put Koster in a tough political spot and to try to split him and the governor. And I think the Attorney General would be wise to not issue an opinion until after the veto session. He probably